second class in which we will be talking about the history of Islam. So far, everything that we talked about is not to be communicated to Muslims. This is not the purpose of this part of our study. How to talk with Muslims is in our last class today, for we do not wrestle. This is for you to have an understanding on Islam and the origins of Islam and the theology of Islam. For your family members who probably are already considering conversion to Islam. Now you have an answer. Why do you believe in the Bible as the inspired word of God, not the Quran? Where did Islam come from? Well, in the first class we studied how small acts of the lack of faith prepared the ground for the religion of Islam to be born. We studied the pre-Muhammad part of the history of Islam. Now we will study the life of Muhammad and the early history of Islam. But first, let's consider these facts. With over 1.5 billion Muslims around the world, Islam is statistically, according to the secular statistics, over 22% of the world's population. It is the second largest religion in the world and the fastest growing religion in the world for now. Now, by the way, Islam has been around for 1400 years. And if you go on Facebook and YouTube, you will get the impression that Islam will dominate the whole world in 5 years. I don't think that's going to happen. It did not happen in the past 1400 years. This is not going to happen in your lifetime. 21 of the 22 Arab countries are Muslim. And Arab, that's an ethnicity. I'm an Arab, I look like an Arab, I speak Arabic. Islam is a religion. That's a faith system that you can choose to either follow or not. It does not have anything to do with your ethnicity. Hopefully you know that, because you know that there are many people around the world that think that if you're white, you should have a certain faith. If you're an Arab, you should have a certain faith. If you're Chinese, you should have a certain faith. No, you can choose your faith. The only Arab country that does not claim to be Muslim is South Sudan, a new country that was born in 2011. All the rest of the Arab countries in the dark green map here are Muslim countries. Most of the people there are Muslim, and Islam is the official religion of those countries. 50 out of the 258 countries of the world at the time of the preparation of this slide are Muslims, and as you can see, the Muslim world is almost one block that used to be the Islamic Empire 1,000 years ago, almost. I have been asked to put a slide on glossary, and please feel free to pause, rewind, ask any question, make any comment as I speak. You do not need to wait until the end of this class. The word Islam means submission. The word Islam, that's the religion. Muslim, that's the person that follows that religion. A Muslim is a follower of Islam, just as a Christian is a follower of Christianity. Literally, the word Islam means submission. The word Muslim means submissive. We will study the details of the Islamic object of faith. The element of faith, God. Literally, the word Allah means God. I am an Arab-speaking person. I have an Arabic Bible. The Arabic Bible calls God Allah. You will actually see the Arabic Bible in the next slide. The Muslim scripture that we have been studying today is the Quran. Literally means the red, or the red book, or the book that is to be read. That's the meaning of the word Quran. It is divided into 114 surahs or chapters with a total of 6,236 verses that are called ayat. The Quran is around 3 times bigger than the New Testament. Many Muslims memorize the whole Quran. All Muslims memorize at least part of the Quran for their daily prayers. Verse numbers, by the way, those of you who will go online, who will download the Quran app to mark all those, because I promise you, you will be using those verses as references for the rest of your lives. Remember, the verse number of the Quran is put at the end of the verse, not at the beginning. So, when I tell you to go to the Bible and read John 3:16, you go to John chapter 3, and you look for number 16, and you read the verse after number 16. In the Quran, if I tell you to read Surah number 3 and verse number 16, you look for number 16 and you will read the verse before it. Do not get confused. The Quran is the primary source of the Islamic faith. The Quran is believed by Muslims to be inspired by God, the Word of God. The second source of the Islamic faith is the Hadith, believed by Muslims to be the word of Muhammad. The word Sharia literally means law. Technically, it means the law of Islam that evolved from the law of Moses, from the Jewish law. This is the example that I told you. That's a Bible, this is not a Quran. This is my native tongue Bible. And the first passage literally says, in the beginning, Allah created the heaven and the earth. This is Genesis 1:1, because Allah is Arabic for God. The second passage is from Exodus 24 and verse 12. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and be there, and I will give you tablets of stone and the Sharia." God gave Moses the Sharia. Well, not the Sharia law of Muslims, but the law of Moses. The word Sharia literally means law. The third chapter, Ephesians 5:2. Paul tells us to walk in love as Christ also has loved us and submitted himself for us. Guess what's the Arabic word that is used here? Submitted literally became Muslim. Well, Christ did not become Muslim, but he submitted himself to us. Many people struggle with the fact that the world speaks another language than English. This is my favorite one. Paul tells Timothy in 1 Timothy 6 to fight the good fight of faith. Guess what's the Arabic word for fight? Jihad. Well, of course, Paul is not telling Timothy to blow himself up or to fly planes into buildings or to chop heads off. He's telling him to fight the good fight of faith. Funny story, a few months ago, a congregation called me and wanted me to do a week-long presentation on Islam, so an extended version of what I'm doing here today. And we set the date, and the minister that was calling me said, "One more question. What translation do you use?" I said, "Well, I'm a student of God's Word. I have many of these." He said, "Well, our congregation is kind of conservative." I said, "How conservative?" He said, "They are against using the NIV." I said, "Well, my personal Bible is New King James." He said, "That's good, then we were all set." I said, "You may want to tell your congregation that my native tongue Bible uses Allah for God, Sharia for the law of Moses, Jihad for the Christian fight, and the root word for Muslim to see that Christ that has submitted himself for us." And just like that, the NIV sounded as conservative as the NRA. There are 5 pillars of the Islamic faith. We had this discussion a few minutes ago. The 5 pillars of Islam, the things that you must do to become Muslim. By the way, Islam does not answer the question, what must I do to go to heaven? The Bible directly asks and directly answers, what must I do to be saved? Islam does not give that answer. That's why Muslims fight each other. Because every Muslim has a different definition of Islam. And a different version of what must you do to be a faithful follower of Islam. But in general, these are the 5 pillars of the Islamic faith. A Muslim must do 5 things. By the way, a Muslim may approach you and say, if you just believe in God and believe in Muhammad as his prophet, then you will be Muslim. That's a lie. Because, well, you have to do the 5 pillars of the Islamic faith. Well, if I do them all, am I saved? No. Islam never assures you of salvation. In fact, the word salvation does not even exist in the Quran. Shahada, that's the confession. You confess that there is only one God and that Muhammad is his prophet, the seal of the prophets, the final prophet. You must pray 5 times a day. There are 2 words for prayer in Arabic. Dua is the exact same prayer that we do. Communication with God, talking with God, asking Him things, asking for forgiveness, praising God, and thanking God. But this is not the kind of prayer that you are required to do if you're Muslim. You must do the ritual prayers, a series of movements and things to recite. I think you have seen Muslims praying in a certain way, a series of standing and kneeling and prostrating and sitting. And they repeat that 5 times a day. You must do the zakat, give alms. You must fast the whole month of Ramadan. You will not eat or drink or have an intimate relationship from sunrise to sunset for a whole month. and you must do the Hajj pilgrimage. You must go to Mecca and Saudi Arabia to do those rituals around Al-Kaaba. Is that the end of the requirements of the Islamic faith? No, you would be on your way to endless ordinances under the Islamic law. Women must dress in a certain way. Men must be circumcised, for example, and so forth. These are the 5 pillars of Islam. What must you do to be Muslim? These are the 6 pillars of the Islamic faith. A Muslim must believe in these things to be Muslim. You must believe in God. You must believe in the scriptures, the Quran and the Bible. Which of course you cannot believe in both of them, but of course Muhammad had no clue what the Bible said. You must believe in the messengers or the prophets. You must believe in the angels and the last day and predestination. These are the 6 pillars of the Islamic faith. Okay, Muhammad was the creator of Islam, although Muslims consider him the final prophet of God. That's the main difference between Islam and the Nation of Islam. Islam is a worldwide religion. The Nation of Islam is a black American social religious movement. The main difference between the two, well, there are many differences. Islam is not color-coded. The Nation of Islam is. But the main theological difference is that Islam believes, the regular Islam, the traditional Islam, the religion that I converted out of, believes that Muhammad is the final prophet. There has not been any prophet after Muhammad. The Nation of Islam believes that there are other prophets that are living today, which of course Muslims do not agree with. This is Arabia in the year 570 AD. That's when Muhammad was born. We have studied in the class before that what was the atmosphere in Arabia. By the way, like we said, Judaism and Christianity were not the only 2 religions in Israel, in the Holy Land, at the time of Jesus. There were many other cults, Jewish Christian heresies, that had a confused idea about the faith, about the gospel, and about the character of God and the character of Jesus. And the Judaizers that we read about them in the Bible, they gave birth to those heresies. The Romans invaded the Holy Land in AD 70. Persecuted and did not differentiate between a Jew and a Jew and a Jew. A Jew and a Jew who believed in Jesus and became a Christian, and a Jew who was a member of those heresies. Jews resisted, and they were massacred. 1.5 million Jews were killed by the Romans, and their last stronghold was a place called Masada, and they were slaughtered there. Christians were not slaughtered because they listened to what Jesus told them. Jesus told them, when you see these things, do not resist. If you are in Judea, run to the mountains. If you are on your rooftop, do not go downstairs to take your belongings. Do not resist the Romans, flee, run away. So they were spared. The Jewish Christian heretics, the Judaizers, fled the area into the neighboring places, and they eventually ended up in Arabia. Many of them ended up in Arabia. That's the community, or that's the culture that was common in Muhammad's time. Most Arabs were pagan, but there was a very strong Jewish Christian influence there. The white space between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire is the Arab Peninsula, what we call today as Saudi Arabia. Because it's Arabia, that's the name of the peninsula, and it is ruled by the Al Saud family. That's why they call it today Saudi Arabia. It was not a country at that time. Arabs had a strong culture, they were good fighters, they advanced in poetry and literature, they were known to be hospitable and many other things, but they were not country. They were tribes fighting each other. And they were starving for an identity. They were looking for themselves in a figure. Just like what happened in the past presidential election, where people went berserk over their political figures. Either of them, some of them. I mean, how people can be so insecure sometimes. They are giving birth to figures like the figure that we're studying now. Arabs were mostly pagan, with some Jewish Christian heretics, not Jewish and Christian heretics. They were separate tribes. They were surrounded by the two superpowers of the world back then, the Persian and the Roman Empire. That's why they felt humiliated, looking for an identity, looking for someone to give them a name and to unite them. And it was then when a Bible prophecy was about to be fulfilled, the prophetic beginning of Islam, Genesis 16, verses 11 and 12, behold, you are with a child, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man, his hand against every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of his brethren. As we have seen, Muhammad is the biological descendant of Ishmael. Well, guess what? I am a biological descendant of Muhammad. That's me, Wissam, that's my father, Yusuf. And it goes all the way, that's number 16, from which my last name, Al-Aethawi. And it goes all the way down to, well, the 12 imams of the Shiite faith, and then to Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad. Muhammad did not have any sons that gave birth to children. So I belong to Muhammad through his daughter. Muhammad was born in Mecca, a city in Saudi Arabia, in the year 570 AD. His father died before he was born. His mom died at the age of 6, when he was 6. His grandfather raised him up, and then his uncle. He worked as a shepherd in his youth, and then as a merchant. When he was 25, he met a woman, a rich woman by the name Khadija. She was 40. She invested her money in his business. She fell in love with him so much that she sent her slave to propose for him. She proposed to Muhammad. Muhammad married her. The one who joined them in marriage was the priest that says, truly, this is the great law that has come upon Moses. That we studied in the last class. He was the one who ushered the prophethood of Muhammad. Muhammad continued to be married only to that woman until her death, because Muhammad was exposed to the biblical definition of marriage, one man and one woman. At the age of 40, Muhammad used to hang out with those followers of the Jewish Christian heresies, and one of the practices that they used to do is to go to a cave in this mountain, the Mount of Light, which is 2 miles outside Mecca. Well, he was meditating there. He claimed to have received a revelation from God through the angel Gabriel. And that would be the first part of what we know today as the Quran. This is the first part that Muhammad has claimed to have received from God. And yet it is not chapter 1, it is chapter 96. An important thing to put in mind for this class and for the next class is that the Quran today is not arranged in a chronological order. The first surah, the first chapter of the Quran chronologically, is put as surah number 96 in the Quran. The first surah in the Quran, in the standard Quran, is actually the 5th surah chronologically. Why are we paying attention to the chronological order? Because Islam evolved, and the later passages are telling you the truth about Islam, and not the earlier ones. The earlier ones tells you how Islam started. The later ones tells you how Islam is supposed to be today. We will see that in one slide. Okay? When Muhammad first started Islam, he did not mean it to be intended to be a separate religion. He said, I have received a revelation from the same God that revealed the Bible, that tells general things: do good, worship God, do not worship idols, give money to the poor, and all these things. Eventually, Islam evolved into a separate religion. Muhammad continues to receive those revelations for the rest of his life. The Quran was supposedly written down by Muhammad's companions. Muhammad was illiterate, but the Quran was compiled and standardized by the 3rd successor or caliph of Muhammad. His name was Uthman. His wife was the first person who converted to Islam, believed in his message, then Ali, his cousin, and then his foster son. By the way, adoption is banned in Islam. Muhammad had a foster son by the name Zayd. That Zayd had a wife. Muhammad wanted that wife. He caused him to divorce her, and he wanted to take her. Well, guess what? That would be considered incest, right? Not unless adoption is banned, in which case Zayd would not be considered a relative of Muhammad. Muhammad proclaimed his message in secret for 3 years, then he turned public. Within almost 10 years, those hungry people for an identity and for their own political figure hundreds of them converted to Islam, whole tribes proclaimed loyalty to Muhammad. Things started to get bad. Muslims started to get persecuted. It's important to study this part of history to understand why Muslims are angry today. Why are they reactive? Why are they paranoid? Why do they think that the world hates them? It's because of that. Opposition in Mecca started when Muhammad delivered verses that condemned idol worship. By the way, Muslims do not worship an idol. Muslims are very strict against idolatry. In fact, they consider us Christians to be idolaters because we believe in the Trinity, which is not three gods, it's three persons in one God. Muhammad said that you cannot worship idols, you have to worship the one God. Well, guess what? Mecca had 360 idols, and the Meccan forefathers, the Meccan elders, were making money out of those people who used to come and worship there. Well, that jeopardizes their business, right? Do you remember in the book of Acts, when Paul went to Ephesus, and he said, you cannot worship Artemis or Diana, you have to worship God. Who persecuted him? The ones who were making the statues of Diana. This is exactly what happened to Muhammad. This is the Kaaba that used to have 360 idols, and now is considered by Muslims the holiest place. And Muslims bow down to this place 5 times every day, wherever they are. Muhammad and his followers were persecuted by the Arab pagans. Sumayya, a maidservant, was killed with a spear by her master. She would become the first martyr for Islam. Some Muslims migrated because of that persecution to Ethiopia. Muhammad himself fled to Al-Ta'if, another city in Saudi Arabia, but came back shortly after he was almost stoned to death. Important clans imposed sanctions, political sanctions on Muhammad and his companions to pressure them to renounce Islam. And things started to get from bad to worse when his wife died and his uncle. At the same time, they were his 2 strongest supporters. Right after that, things started to get better for Muhammad. A delegation from another city in Arabia called Medina was impressed with Muhammad and his leadership traits so much that they invited him not only to provide him with a shelter in Medina, but to make him the leader of that town. At the age of 53, Muhammad arrived Medina. That was Friday, September 27, 622. Yes, Muhammad was a real person, and that is real history that we're talking about. And that is called Hijrah, literally migration. You know that Muslims use a different calendar called the Hijri calendar because it starts from that event. That is a major turning point in the Islamic history because Muslims used to be passive before that. Now they are on the offense. That's what changed. This is the road of Muhammad's exodus from Mecca to Medina. An interesting observation. It was parallel to the Red Sea. The biblical exodus was across the Red Sea. One of them had God's autograph, but not the other. Look at this timeline of the evolution of Islam. Islam did not end in Muhammad's time the way it started. This is the beginning of Islam when Muhammad first started to claim to receive revelations from God. And this is when Muhammad died. And this point in the middle is the migration, the hijrah. Look at what happened. At first, Muhammad did not intend to create a new religion. He just called Arabs to submit to God. Submit, quote unquote. Literally, Islam means submission. The passages that he delivered at that time were general. They did not describe any new religion. Believe in God, do not follow Satan, a description of heaven or paradise, which is less spiritual than heaven, a graphic description of hell, and these things, they were general. Islam was peaceful. It did not have any violent passage. Later on, when Muhammad delivered the 55th surah, which is surah number 6 in the standard Quran, called the Catalan, Muhammad showed his first departure from the biblical teaching when he introduced a new kosher law that is different than the Jewish kosher law. He said, Jews have this law, let's have that law. The only difference was camels. Camels are banned in the Jewish kosher law, Leviticus 11. Camels are not banned in Islam. That was the first time Muhammad introduces Islam as a separate religion. That's when the word Islam became a word that describes a religion, not the general submission to God. Islam continued to be tolerant to the rest of the religions. Islam continued to be peaceful until after the migration, after the Hijrah, when Muhammad delivered the 87th surah of the Quran, which is surah number 2 in the standard Quran, in which not only did he introduce Islam as the only way to God, but he started to wage war against anyone who does not convert to Islam. Before the Hijrah, the Quran depended heavily on the scripture. We have read the passage 2 classes ago that says the Quran is not made up, it confirms the Bible. Right after the Hijrah, Muhammad said, well, maybe the Bible is not accurate. You see the Quran, and if you see any difference between the Quran and the Bible, you follow the Quran and not the Bible. The passages started to become more contemporary and local, talking about Muhammad and his battles and his surroundings, not general as they used to be. Islam became violent. In each of those stages, Muhammad delivered passages. Those passages are not in that same order in the standard Quran today, because the Quran has been shuffled as you would shuffle a pack of playing cards. In March of 624 AD, Muhammad led 313 warriors in a raid on a Meccan merchant caravan. That merchant caravan had a protecting force of 1,000 soldiers. Muslims won that battle, even though they were outnumbered 3-1. They still believed that was divine intervention, and they started to be so self-confident. Muslims are good fighters, and that was the first battle that they had. Muslims won all the next campaigns in Muhammad's time. In fact, in the year 630, Muhammad marched back to the city that persecuted him, the city of Mecca, took control over it, destroyed the idols, purged the Kaaba from the idols. Most Meccans converted to Islam. Muhammad died at the age of 63, was buried in the Mosque of the Prophet, or Al-Masjid Al-Nabawi, which is this one. Shortly before his death, Muhammad conquered and united all Arabia. Remember that once wide space between the Roman and the Persian Empire that was not a country? Within a decade, it became one country, one people, with one army that is so full of determination. Muslims conquered Iraq in 636, destroyed the Persian army that was controlling Iraq a few years later. Then Jerusalem in 638, then Egypt in 639, look how fast they are going. Then they expanded all the way to China in the east and France in the west, before their advance in Europe was stopped by the French, or the Franks, led by Charles Martel, the grandfather of Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor, in the Battle of Tours in October of 732. That's how Islam spread like a wildfire within less than a century to cover all that wide space from France to China. Because Islam spread faster than it could control its state, and because of the internal divisions and the corruption of the Islamic State leadership, the Islamic Empire fell with the fall of Baghdad to the Mongols in 1258. The Islamic Empire was revived not by the Arabs, but by the Turks that established the Ottoman Empire. That lasted for another 4 centuries or 5 centuries, until it also fell by the end of World War I. And today, groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah wants to revive that Islamic Empire to do what the Quran tells them to do. And we will be studying that in our next class.